You can do the, I think trans people are totally fine. But then when the rubber hits the road, when it's time to validate and give them rights and write them legally into your society, that's when you balk. That's when you're suddenly not super interested in defending their rights and giving them the resources and the ability to exist within your society. That's when we say, it doesn't matter what you say. So, next. Okay. So, from one Harry Potter topic to basically another. The New York Times published over the weekend. Was this the weekend? When did this get published? Thursday. That's kind of the weekend. But towards the end of last week, the New York Times published a opinion piece by somebody named Pamela Paul, titled "In Defense of JK Rowling." So, I've not heard good things about this. Let's take a look, shall we? All right. Trans people, okay, quote, "Trans people need and deserve protection. I believe the majority of trans identified people not only pose zero threat to others, but are vulnerable. I respect every trans person's right to live any way that feels authentic and comfortable for them. I feel nothing but empathy and solidarity with trans women who've been abused by men." Why not just trans women in general? But okay. These statements were written by JK Rowling, the author of the Harry Potter series, a human rights activist, and, according to a noisy fringe of the internet and a number of powerful transgender rights activists and LGBT lobbyist groups, a transphobe. Yes, she is a TERF. Yep, that does track. Even many of Rowling's devoted fans have made this accusation. In 2020, the Leaky Cauldron, one of the biggest Harry Potter fan sites, claimed that Rowling had endorsed, quote, "harmful and disproven beliefs about what it means to be a transgender person," letting members know it would avoid featuring quotes from and photos of the author. Okay. Other critics have advocated that bookstores pull her books from the shelves, and some bookstores have done so. She has also been some bookstores, so like what, local places? Okay. She also has been subjected to verbal abuse, doxing. I've heard of the doxing. Her address is rather public, so okay. Let's see. She has also been subject to verbal abuse, doxing, and threats of sexual and other physical violence, including death threats. Other critics have advocated. Now in rare and wide-ranging interviews for the podcast series The Witch Trials of JK Rowling, which begins next week, Rowling is sharing her experiences. I have had, quote, "I have had direct threats of violence, and I have had people coming to my house where my kids live, and I've had my address posted online," she says in one of the interviews. I've had what the police anyway would regard as credible threats. Is that like new? Not to say that none of this happened, but like as a public figure, is that not like kind of par for the course? Like, I would, if you had told me JK Rowling didn't get any of these things before 2020, I would be rather shocked. This campaign against Rowling is as dangerous as it is absurd. Well, I'm glad that they put this in the opinion section. The brutal stabbing of Salman Rushdie last summer is a forceful reminder of what can happen when writers are demonized. And in Rowling's case, the characterization of her as a transphobe doesn't square with her actual views. So, okay, I'm going to assume that this article, because they decided to put all of these pro-trans quotes up here in the front, I'm going to make the assumption that what they're going to be playing at is the classic, but they've said they've said nice things before. How can they be a transphobe if they've said nice things before? To which it comes down to material outcome. JK Rowling has gone out of her way to actively fight against things like bathroom bills, which if you don't know, trans people who don't go into we'll take trans women as a good example. Trans women since that's the one they always seem to be obsessed with. Trans women who are forced to go into men's rooms are at an exceedingly high percentage a risk of assault or abuse by the men in those restrooms, right? Whereas trans women who go into women's restrooms show absolutely no propensity toward assault or battery or sexual abuse in those spaces. To put it plainly, the critique that JK Rowling and others make, and others like her make, is that having trans women in women's restrooms makes them uncomfortable, but they have not yet been able to point to any harm committed by that community. What they have been able to point to are cisgender straight men assaulting women in bathrooms, which they would have done either way, because they obviously don't have an interest in the law. So the idea that this is a problem borne out by trans people is simply false. And the solution for JK Rowling would be to make sure that trans people go to the bathroom that they were biologically assigned to, or the one that they biologically align with, I suppose, which again would cause an immense amount of harm, abuse, and assault for that community. In and of itself, that policy is transphobic. That policy will do nothing but harm trans women, and the enactment of that policy does nothing to harm cis women. That is why it's transphobic. Along with J.K. Rowling's, and let's be clear about this, factual misunderstanding of the differences between sex and gender, which, by the way, is a lot of what trans identity hinges upon in terms of one's identity, also transphobic. She can say that she thinks trans people are, they have rights and everything else, but if those rights don't include going to the bathroom that you align with in terms of your gender, or being able to go into the prisons that you align with, or any other case where trans people just want to be treated as the gender that they identify with because it's the one that they fit into in our social structures, then yeah, there's no space for them in your society. Like, you can't do this. You can do I think trans people are totally fine. But then when the rubber hits the road, when it's time to validate and give them rights and write them legally into your society, that's when you balk. That's when you're suddenly not super interested in defending their rights and giving them the resources and the ability to exist within your society. That's when we say, it doesn't matter what you say. It doesn't matter if you have quotes saying that, like, oh, I think trans people are perfectly fine. None of it matters. Materially, you have created conditions that harm this community simply based on their identity. There's no room for this. At the end of the day, we all understand this with every other group. And the person who writes this understands the phenomenon I'm speaking of, where you say one thing, you vote another way. You say that you don't have a problem with this or that. You say, how many times are there racists who are like, look, I don't have anything against black people. I'm just saying, isn't it odd that they they commit 50% of the crime while only attributing to 13% of the population? Meanwhile, the goal of that rhetoric is to obfuscate the fact that, what they're saying is racist because they're drawing an implication that black people in and of themselves are just violent. That's how implications work. We can already see in this article that this entire opinion hinges on the idea that in this one case, we must not abide by the obvious implications that JK Rowling has made with her policy prescriptions. It's rather obvious. Like, I don't mind gay people, I just don't think they should be able to get married. That's what this is. So like, you can't do the like, oh, so like they're okay with gay people. No, it's rather obvious. Gay people, they think, do not have the same rights, meaning second-class citizens. Like, doesn't matter. We understand this in every other context. But again, this article is just gonna do the nope, I can't understand implications, I can't understand material outcomes to rhetoric and or actual advocacy and activism. The brutal, yeah, I know. Okay, so why would anyone accuse her of transphobia? Surely Rowling must have played some part, you might think. The answer is straightforward. Because she has asserted the right to spaces for biological women only, such as domestic abuse shelters and sex-segregated prisons. Right. So if you're a woman, if you're a trans woman, and you are battered by your cis boyfriend, then you can fuck off, and you're not allowed in women's domestic abuse shelters. Funny, because didn't she just say, I'm sorry, didn't Joanne just say, I feel nothing but empathy and solidarity with trans women who've been abused by men? So she feels empathy and solidarity, except when the time comes to have for those trans women to go to those shelters, to be in the space that makes them the most safe. Like, it's just doublespeak. It's just doublespeak. She just says that the opposite opinion that she holds, and then does the thing that she actually believes, which is that trans women aren't women. They're men dressed as women. That's why they can't be in. Women's abuse shelters. That's why they can't be in women's prisons. Like even though. Is there any statistic in which trans women commit a disproportionate amount of abuse within women's prisons? Do you think that statistic? Do you think that study has been done? Do you think there's any significant evidence? No. All it is is vibes. That's all this is. It's just vibes. It's icky. I don't like it. That's all this is. It's no different than Ben Shapiro getting icky about black people or icky about WAPs. Like that's all this is. Yeah. What else? Domestic abuse, sex. Yeah. And it's always biological women, to which at the end of the day, she would include what? Trans men, which like are trans. So trans men are women then. Which means, again, trans people don't exist then. They're not the actual identity that they purport to be, which again would be transphobic. Like, okay. Because she has insisted that when it comes to determining a person's legal gender status, self-declared gender identity is insufficient. Okay, yeah, so you literally can't be trans then. How is this any different from transphobia then? Like, if in her worldview you can't be trans, how else do we describe that then? Because she has expressed skepticism about phrases like people who menstruate. Menstruate. Why do I have such? Why? I don't know why I have trouble saying that. Menstruate in reference to biological women. Yeah, because trans men could technically menstruate. Like that's kind of. Yeah. Also, who cares? Why do you care if somebody says this? Like, why does it matter? It's like when people got up in arms about, like, when somebody said birthing people. It's like, and they're like, you mean mothers? Like, well, no, mothers are very different from birth. There are people who give birth who aren't mothers. Like, the fuck are you talking about? Let's see. Because she has defended herself and by far, and far more important, supported others, including detransitioners and feminist scholars who have come under attack from trans activists. Yeah, because they're also probably, if they are feminist scholars, they're probably TERFs, which again are trans exclusionary radical feminists. They are feminists who do not include trans people in their movement, because trans people are not, they're just not part of their movement. You can't allow for trans men to be part of your movement, because then you would be saying that they're women, which they're not, and you can't include trans women because you think they're men, even though they're not. So you can't have trans people, like, you know. And at the end of the day, her defending herself is not her, like I love when they do this, like, oh, she's just defending herself. It's like, yeah, defending herself by doing what? Saying stuff like, oh, you know, people who buy Hogwarts Legacy are validating my political opinions and prove that public opinion is on my side. Like, yeah, that's what she does. She literally implicates fans of her fictional universe to validate her points, which is also piece of shit activity. But like, that's not defense. That's like hostage taking. That's like actively, like, really harmful and very bad. I mean, also why the left should not have ever validated or legitimized that argument. Let's see. And because she followed on Twitter and praised some of the work of Magdalene Burns, a lesbian feminist who had made incendiary comments about trans, so a transphobe. I don't like it always comes down to like Magdalene Burns. We're gonna get you can't criticize her because she's a lesbian feminist. She just happened to say some transphobe shit. It's like, no, she's just a transphobe. I don't give a fuck if you're a lesbian feminist. I don't give a fuck what you are. If you're a transphobe, you're a transphobe. No amount of a little qualifier, little identity traits is gonna get you out of you're just a transphobe. Like, I don't know what to tell you. You might disagree, perhaps strongly. I do, actually, with Rowling views and actions here. You may believe that the prevalence of violence against transgender people means that airing any views contrary to those of vocal trans activists will aggravate animus towards a vulnerable population. So, it's not that I believe that the prevalence of violence means that airing any of the views contrary to the vocal trans activists will aggravate animus towards a vulnerable population. It's not, you know, it's not airing any views contrary. What it is her activism and her using not just her wealth, but her influence as a, let's be clear, an elite. She has a lot of money. She can use that for political donations. She is able to move the political needle through those donations. Therefore, she has a pretty easy way. You know, it'd be one thing if JK Rowling was some dumb bitch on the fucking corner on top of a fucking soapbox yelling all her turf shit. Guess what? We would all say that person's fucking stupid. Who cares? Because at the end of the day, they have no ability to disproportionately influence the political body that they live within. But that's not the case for JK Rowling. JK Rowling has money, has influence, has power. And she uses that not to air views views contrary to vocal trans activists. She uses it to actively fight those people and strip rights away, or more accurately, keep rights away from a community that she does not respect, simply for the fact that she doesn't believe that they're valid. It's not, they always want to do this like game of like, oh, well, like, you know, you just don't like her because she disagrees. I don't give a fuck. You can disagree all you want. There's a million other people who probably agree with her and disagree with me. That's fine. What I have a problem with is people who have a disproportionate amount of power using their wealth and influence to put the thumbs on the scales of public opinion and to drive public opinion against marginalized communities. It's no different than what the Nazis did. Do you think the Nazis thought that they, you know, when we describe like Nazi propaganda like against the Jews, you realize that like they would always frame it in the early days, at least. You always want to frame these sorts of things like, oh, you know, we're just pushing back against the prevalence of Jewish individuals in banking, and isn't it a bit weird? And suddenly you get to the point where, well, gee howdy, we seem to just, you know, we kind of rounded them all up because, you know, they've been kind of, ruining the country and like doing all the rest of them, and, you know, we just took them to the gas chambers and we like took care of all that situation. Like, at the end of the day, what we're describing is not her just going on Twitter and just mouthing off on, you know, she is not just giving her opinions. She is actively moving people, moving voters to her side against a marginalized group. You know, they said What did they say? Let's see. No. Where's the thing? I remember, where was it? I think it was like detransition. There's supports yeah. Where is it? Defended herself more. Yeah, here it is. Far more important, supported others, which are other transphobes, including detransitioners and feminist scholars. So the reason why they want to draw some equivalence between detransitioners and feminist scholars is mainly a way to be like, no. Look, like feminist, we all like feminist scholars. They believe in women's rights and all the rest of the stuff. And then pair that with detransitioners, which are absolutely people who exist. There are people who transition and then decide it's not for them. And guess what? Those people have as much of a right to detransition as the people who don't transition have to stay the way that they are. But most of the time, when we talk about detransitioners as a movement, they take up an infinitesimally small amount of actual trans people, but they get signal boosted because they are part of the narrative. They are used as a narrative by people like JK Rowling to push her, isn't being trans dangerous? Isn't it like not good? To push all of her stuff. She uses these people to launder her transphobic opinions by pulling somebody from the trans community who detransitioned for their own reasons and using them to validate all of her opinions, even though most of the time, if you actually look, I believe the numbers for reasons why people detransition have almost nothing to do with their actual them double second guessing their transition. It mostly comes down to the community that they're in and their ability to actually socially transition, or if they're getting a lot of hate and threats and everything else, they might turn back from that. That's not okay. And that's most people who detransition. But there's this small little group of people who can be exploited for the rights campaign against trans people that get signal boosted from folks like JK Rowling. Anyway. Okay, let's see. But nothing Rowling has said qualifies as transphobic. She is not disputing the existence of gender dysphoria. That's okay. She has never voiced opposition to allowing people to transition under evidence-based therapeutic and medical care. So only within the boundaries that she's comfortable with. Let's be really clear about that. She will only validate you if you fit into the specific reasons that she is comfortable with. Does that sound like equal treatment? Yeah, she is not denying transgender people equal pay. Okay, she is not denying transgender people equal pay or housing. Not explicitly, but if you're trans and there aren't laws to protect you from and there aren't hate crime laws to protect you from hate crime and from discrimination, then yeah, they're gonna have trouble getting equal pay and equal housing. At the end of the day, trans people need to be written in a legal sense into the legal identifiers for women and for men, for to be able to apply to the way that we've written hate crime laws. So there is no evidence that she is putting trans people, quote, in danger, as has been claimed, nor is she denying their right to exist. I mean, she's not denying their right to exist, just not a right to exist under the framework that everybody else does. Simply put, JK Rowling is you can exist, you just can't exist the same way that everybody else does, which would be called inequality, dipshit. And also the whole in danger part. We already talked about this. She doesn't support, trans women going into women's restrooms, which puts trans women at an increased risk of abuse and assault in men's restrooms. Same goes for women's prisons. The exact same dynamic we see in women's prisons. Trans women who go into men's prisons are at a much higher risk of being assaulted and or being raped, assaulted, whatever that might be. That would be what I call in danger. Also, like, not treating these people with equal rights in your society will, like, put them in the crosshairs of people who are assholes and who like picking on people who they think have less rights. That's just kind of how that works. There was a time in America where hate crimes committed to Muslims, but like it's mostly brown people generally, went up because there was a devaluing of their social value in our society. Like, that's kind of how this works. You devalue somebody, you make them kind of an other, and every once in a while one of them gets stabbed, like Brianna Gray, or Gay, I think it's Gay, Brianna Gay or Jay, I don't remember, I don't know how it's supposed to be pronounced, but like, you get somebody gets stabbed for being trans, possibly. We don't know the full details for that, but like, stuff like this is not uncommon for trans people. Take it from her former critic, E.J. Rosetta, a journalist who once denounced Rowling for her supposed transphobia, was commissioned last year to write an article called 20 Transphobic JK Rowling Quotes We're Done With. After 12 weeks of reporting and reading, Rosetta wrote, "I've not found a single truly transphobic message." On Twitter, she declared, "You're burning the wrong witch." Yeah, this person's stupid. I'm okay with that. This person sounds fucking stupid. Mainly because again, let's remember here, this is just, hey, she's said nice things before. How can she possibly, like, we understand this in terms of race. It's not really hard to understand. Let's see. For the record, I too read all of Rowling's books, including the crime novels written under her pen name Robert Galbraith, and came up empty-handed. Those who have parsed her work for transgressions have objected to the fact that in one of her Galbraith novels she included a transgender character, and that in another of these novels a killer occasionally disguises himself by dressing as a woman. Needless to say, it takes a certain kind of person to see this as evidence of bigotry. Ah, yes, here's some evidence, and then you read it and go, no. Like, I mean, that's fine if you have a stronger argument, but you can't simply hand wave it and be like, nope, it's just not, because I don't think it is. Like, all right. This isn't the first time Rowling and her work have been condemned by ideologues. For years, books in the Harry Potter series were among the most banned in America. Many Christians announced the book's positive depiction of witchcraft and magic. Some called Rowling a heretic. Megan Phelps Roper, a former member of the Westboro Baptist Church and the author of Unfollow, a memoir of loving and leaving extremism, says that she appreciated the novels as a child, but raised in a family notorious for its extremism and bigotry, she was taught to believe Rowling was going to hell over her support for gay rights. Phelps Roper has taken the time to rethink her biases. She is now the host of The Witch Trials of JK Rowling, the podcast based on 9 hours of her interviews with Rowling. The first time Rowling has spoken at length about her advocacy, explores why Rowling has been subjected. So is this just an ad for her upcoming podcast? That's what this is, right? Like, you wrote this because you wanted to write like a, hey, like, here's like a really weak defense article that's just going to hand wave every actual point. You should go listen to this podcast that she's doing sometime in the near future and hear her opinions on that, where she can also launder her opinions and pretend that she's not transphobic. Like, at the end of the day, it's like, oh, she's going to have somebody who's not going to push back on her and mostly agree with her. Whoa, fucking crazy. Explores why Rowling has been subjected to such wide-ranging vitriol despite a body of work that embraces the virtues of being an outsider, the power of empathy, towards one's enemies, and the primacy of loyalty towards one's friends. Cool. The podcast, which also includes interviews with critics of Rowling, delves into why Rowling has used her platform to challenge certain claims of so-called gender ideology. Ah, yes, the classic. Such as the idea that transgender women should be treated as indistinguishable from biological women in virtually every legal and social context. would you like to make an argument as to why that's not the case? Or is this just gonna be why both her fans and her fiercest critics have asked, would she bother to take such a stand knowing that attacks would ensue? Who cares? If you can't stand by your opinions, then that sounds like a skill issue. I don't care. Every day I get on here and I yell my opinions. And I accept whatever comes of that. It's called having a spine. Let's see. But yeah, like okay. In virtually every legal and social context, like when it comes down to it, it's like, okay, yeah, legal and social context. Like, how would you like them to be? How would you like them to be identified, or how do we enumerate their rights? Like, is there a way that we do that? The pushback, quote, the pushback is often, you are wealthy, you can afford security, you haven't been silenced. All true, but I think that misses the point. The attempt to intimidate and silence me is meant to serve as a warning to other women. Nope, just other transphobes. With similar views who may also wish to speak out, Rowling says in a podcast. So I always love this because like people like this also always need to be like the vanguard of whatever opinion they hold. You know, if they held the opinion that like fucking Frosted Flakes are better than Cheerios, and somebody was like, "You're a dumb fuck. That's obviously incorrect," she would be like, "This is an attempt to silence other people, other women who prefer Frosted Flakes over Cheerios." Like, no, you don't speak for all women. Please shut the fuck up. Like, stop centering yourself with fucking everything. People disagree with you and they tell you you're a dumb fuck and to shut the fuck up. Like, this has nothing to do with women. This has nothing to do with anybody else but you, JK Rowling. Like, you're a dumb fuck. You hold transphobic views. You have all the right to. It's perfectly fine. I just wish you wouldn't use your platform to convince people to marginalize further a group that's already rather marginalized. Silence method, yeah, and this is always I'm always the victim in some form or fashion, and I say that because I have seen it used that way. Rowling continues. She says other women have told her they've been warned. Look at what happened to JK Rowling. Watch yourself. Yeah, don't be a transphobe. If you want to go out there, say transphobe shit, then it's called consequences. I don't know what to tell you. Like, you know, I'm not in support of death threats or doxing or any of the rest of that stuff, but you know, I don't know what to tell you. You know the environment you're in. You know the response you're gonna get, and especially at the end of the day, all the things we're describing are rather normal parts of being a public figure on the internet. So it's like I can't say that I hold a special amount of sympathy for any of this stuff. You know, I don't think anybody should have to deal with any of it, but it's just not unique. Like it's not this unique thing that's happening to JK Rowling that doesn't happen to anybody else. Recently, for example, Joanne Cherry, a Scottish National Party lawmaker who is a lesbian and a feminist, who gives a shit, publicly questioned Scotland's passage of a self-ID law that would allow people to legally establish by mere declaration that they are women after living for only 3 months as a transgender woman, and without any need for a gender dysphoria diagnosis. I'm sorry, is there like is this one of those the government needs to like confirm you need to go do government mandated doctors before you're allowed to transition? This would be one of those like freedom things of like no, I have no, there is no legal or a reasonable ask that anybody should have to submit themselves to government inspection. Let's see. She reported that she faced workplace bullying and death threats. She was also removed from her front bench position in Parliament as spokeswoman of the Justice and Home Affairs. It's called politics. Deal with that one. I think some people are scared to speak out in this debate because when you do speak out, you're often wrongly branded as a transphobe or bigot, she said. Yeah. When you actively fight the equalization of rights for trans people. Because let's be clear. Let's be really, really clear here. How do we, is this any different Like, let's see, law that would allow people to legally establish by mere declaration that they are a woman after living for only 3 months as a transgender woman. Now, let's think about this for a moment. Let's think about this. You are a Scottish woman, and we have a Scottish woman and a Scottish transgender woman, right? Both of them need to use the restroom, right? How do we ensure that both of them, in 2023 right now, how do people like identify which bathroom they're going to go into? How do both these people do it? And how do people who might be in the same space figure that out? Is there a person at the door in women's rooms that, like, they have like a little book or something, or maybe where you go to, the women go to the restroom, they hand them their ID, they scan it, they're like, all right, and they have a little QR code maybe that goes straight to their birth certificate that's like, born female, go ahead. Is that the thing? Because let me tell you, self ID, that's how we go to the bathroom now. Oh my god, there we go, that's better. That's how we go to the bathroom now. There is no identification process you have to go through if you're a trans woman or a trans man to go to the bathroom. And that's the same case for if you're just a man or just a woman. Self-ID is kind of already how we decide a lot of this stuff. Self-ID, for the most part, is how you decide any of this stuff. Society would break down if we needed to identify people's biological sex to do literally anything, to use the restroom, to play in a sport. Like, it would be here all day. And I'm sure they're always going to do the prison thing, but that's why you have the 3-month part of it, because any man who gets arrested and then suddenly wants to pretend to be trans, that'll kind of fall apart rather quickly. So like, like self-ID is how we already do everything. You're not proposing a change. This change is just legitimizing what we already do. Like, this law wouldn't even change any part of society. Trans women will still go to the bathroom, and there still isn't going to be a person standing there to identify whether they truly are a trans woman or if they're just a man attempting to enter the space of women. Which, fun fact, they will do either way, because if they want to like rape you or something, they're just going to do that because they're rapists. I don't know what to tell you. Okay, she reported that she faced workplace. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Phelps Roper told me that Rowling's outspokenness is precisely in the service of this kind of cause. A lot of people think that Rowling is using her privilege to attack a vulnerable group, which she is. But she sees herself as standing up for the rights of a vulnerable group, which would be what? Like, when it comes down to it, the question becomes, what vulnerable group? If JK Rowling says women, the question is, what threat do trans women pose to women? To which she would say, well, they're men. Which, it's like, they're women. Like, this is the central critique. Trans women perform the role of women in society. So what about that makes them a man? Like, and this comes down, again, let's be clear, this comes down to JK Rowling's history with domestic abuse. It is all from feels. It has nothing to do with logic. It has nothing to do with sense. It has nothing to do with facts. It has everything to do with, I was abused by a man. I think trans women are men. Therefore, I worry that I'm going to be assaulted. even though when we're talking about like social what's the word I'm looking for, socialization, when we're talking about the social like role people play, that's going to determine more of those like violent characteristics than anything else, to which trans women are going to be closer to women. So like, what are we talking here? Rowling Phelps proud of views speak out of responsibility and an obligation. She's looking around and realizing that other people are self-censoring because they cannot afford to speak up. But she felt she had to be honest and stand up against the movement that she saw as using authoritarian tactics. So again, with this article, they use this quote. The question becomes, what's authoritarian about it? They've said this entire time that JK Rowling isn't transphobic. They've said this entire time that her movement is inclusive of trans people, but they just don't think trans people should be legally basically written into the laws. So tell me now, what's authoritarian about being like, hey, we need trans people need to be able to go to the bathroom, so yeah, we'll just make it so as long as you've been trans for 3 months, then you're fine to just use the restroom. It's fine. It's not really a big deal. It's just restrooms or whatever it might be. But, to JK Rowling and to others, they're like, that's authoritarianism, which begs the question of like, you don't really know what authoritarianism is, do you? Because pretty much anything that you disagree with is going to get labeled as authoritarian. Like, none of this makes any sense. Also, I don't know what authoritarian tactics also, I'm like, which are what exactly? She does realize that to be to use authoritarian tactics, like when you're invoking this, it's like you have all the power in this conversation. You understand that you have outsized power in this relationship. Like, as Rowling herself notes on the podcast, she's written books where, quote, from the very first page, bullying and authoritarian behavior is held to be one of the worst of human ills. If you actually want to go back and read her books, they're also rather essentialist in terms of like Slytherin students are just evil. Like, they are every evil trait and they're all just evil. But there's like no reasoning why. It's that all of these things build up to be they're evil. Like, you can't be a Slytherin and a good guy when it comes down to it. Those who accuse Rowling of punching down against her critics ignore the fact that she is sticking up. Yeah, again, it's like, it can't be punching down. She's a woman and she's holding fringe ass, what's the word? Transphobic views. Even though, yeah, she's punching down because she has power. Let's see. By sticking up for those who have silenced themselves to avoid, yes, the silent majority argument. Yes, very familiar. Public vilification and threats to physical safety that other critics of recent gender orthodoxies have suffered. Social media is then leveraged to amplify those attacks. It's a strategy Phelps Roper recognizes from her days at Westboro. We leaned into whatever would get us the most attention, and that was often the most outrageous and aggressive versions of what we believed. And maybe a sign that's also not authoritarianism. That's called what's the word? That's called messaging. That's not authoritarian. That's messaging. It may be a sign of the tide turning that, along with Phelps Roper, several like-minded creative people, though generally those with the protection of wealth and strong backing from their employers, are finally braving the heat. In recent months, and after silence or worse from some of the young actors whose careers Rowling work helped advance, several actors from the Harry Potter films, such as Helena Bonham Carter and Ralph Fiennes, have publicly defended the author. That's unfortunate. Oh yeah. Also did you also notice how it's like, oh man, these poor, incredibly rich, what's it called? Actors with a lot of power and influence. They're fighting back against the tide of a bunch of powerless activists. Like, understand, they're trying to paint this picture of like JK Rowling and her whole squad as being like the downtrodden, put upon underdogs. They're not. They're the powerful. They are the elite. They're the wealthy ones. In the words of Fines, J.K. Rowling has written these great books about empowerment, about young children finding themselves as human beings. It's about how you become a better, stronger, more morally centered human being. The verbal abuse directed her is disgusting. It's appalling. That's true. Also, she can write all of those books and still be a piece of shit. Unfortunately, people, even creatives, can make work that isn't actually supportive of their views. Everyone always thinks that they're like the moral, good, centered, and like right person. And especially with like people who write fiction and all the rest of that, you know, they're always thinking like, no, that like I'm writing I'm writing the hero's story. And that might be true. But then down the road they find themselves being like just evil in some aspects. It's not really that like crazy. It's not that crazy of a phenomenon. In Britain, the liberal columnist Hadley Freeman left The Guardian after she said the publication refused to allow her to interview Rowling. She has since joined the Sunday Times, where her first column commended Rowling for her feminist positions. Do I wanna the Sunday Times? I wonder. The Sunday Times. Let's take a look. What could this possibly be? No. Oh, there it is. Get out of my way. Get out of my way. I want to see if this is like a reputable source. Is it? No, that's the Times. That's the Times. I want the Sunday Times. Okay, here we go. Fuck it, we'll take Wikipedia. Is a British newspaper where circulation makes its large News Corp. Oh boy. Owned by News Corp. Oh boy. Who owns News Corp? Oh boy. Murdoch family. I wonder why. Well, then she moved to a right-wing publication. Shocker on that one. Where her first column commended Rowling from his positions. Understand also these people's version of feminism is one from like decades ago and is not inclusive of a lot of other groups that have like propped up over the last like I'd say 20 to 30 years in terms of relevance in society. Another liberal columnist for The Guardian left for similar reasons. After decamping to The Telegraph, she defended Rowling despite earlier threats of rape against her and her children for her work. Millions of Rowling's also, by the way, let's be really, really clear. You can't really substantiate a lot of this in terms of ideology to a degree. Because simply put, like, fucking Christians and men's rights act, the right wing is only interested in JK Rowling's feminism and people's like this as feminism as a vehicle to exterminate trans people. That is literally the only reason why they're interested in these people's views. Otherwise, they are ideologically opposed to each other. But in this case, they've found some common ground. But you have to at the very least leave room for the idea that these right-wing people are going to continue to want to fuel this kind of violent behavior and violent rhetoric against people so that they can kind of solidify pulling them over to the right. Millions, or at the very least, entrapping them into the right a little bit more. Millions of Rowling's readers, no doubt, remain unaware of her demonization, but that doesn't mean that, as with other outlandish claims, whether it's the big lie or QAnon, the accusations aren't insidious and tenacious. Well, again, that's one of those things where she kind of goes out of her way to be like, if you buy the game, then you're down with my transphobia. Like, she's made that a point. The seed has been planted in the culture that young people should feel that there's something wrong with liking Rowling's books, that her books are problematic, and that appreciating her work is complicated. So this is the thing. You can pretend it's not, but it definitely is. Like, it is kind of difficult liking her books because they're so poorly written. And like, you can argue that her books are problematic in certain aspects because I mean, she's writing fiction and she has biases. There's always going to be problematic elements in any kind of like fiction or any kind of I think like universe building, because you're going to see the biases laid rather bare when somebody creates a universe based on their, you know, sole imagination. And like enjoying JK Rowling's work has become incredibly difficult for people and complicated, because a lot of people are like, hey, Harry Potter, the Wizarding franchise, all the rest of that shit is really important to me. It was a core, it was like a core part of my upbringing. I read the books when I was a kid. We said all this during like when the game controversy was going around. There's a lot of people who don't engage with JK Rowling past like the media she creates. That's the only thing that a lot of people are interested in. They don't care about her trans stuff. They don't care about her political opinions. They're just there for her wizard stuff, which I personally think is fine. I don't think I'm not of the opinion that we need to rake people over the coals for that stuff. But it has, and it is difficult for people who are aware of that and still want to enjoy it. You know, from a political standpoint, in my opinion, we need to give people the grace in the room on our side to enjoy their media, enjoy the things that they enjoy, without like, again, without raking them over the coals for it. That I think is super important. I don't know if that's a universal thing that everyone holds on the left, but wish it was. Millions of Rowling's readers no doubt remain unaware. Oh, wait, where was I? Complicated. In recent weeks, an uproar ensued over the new Harry Potter video game. That is a terrible shame. Children would do well to read Harry Potter unreservedly and absorb its lessons. Okay. I mean, this person clearly, it's an opinion, so but like, let's also be clear. Let's be really, really clear. And I recently read like one of the books. I went back and read some of it. They're not very well written books. Like, they're not awful. They're like fine, but they're kind of not that great. They're aggressively mediocre, as Girlfriend Reviews put it. Like description wise, they don't really use like very descriptive, interesting language. It's all rather like basic prose. Like the actual writing of Harry Potter is just okay. There's a reason though why kids gravitated toward it. It's easy to read, easy to understand, and there's a lot of creativity in there. I'm not going to take that away from it, because what Rowling actually says matters. It doesn't really. You can say whatever you want. In 2016, when accepting the Penn Allen Foundation Award for Literary Service, Rowling referred to her support for feminism and for the rights of transgender people. As she put, "My critics are at liberty to claim that I'm trying to convert children to Satanism, and I'm free to explain that I'm exploring human nature and morality, or to say you're an idiot, depending on which side of the bed I got out of that day." Rowling could have just stayed in bed. She could have could have taken refuge in her wealth and fandom. In her Harry Potter universe, heroes are marked by courage and compassion. Also by house, let's be really honest here. Her best characters learn to stand up to bullies and expose false accusations, and that even when it seems the world is set against you, you have to stand firm in your core beliefs and what's right. That's totally fine. You should totally do that. You should also be open to being incorrect, and also be open to criticism, which she hasn't been. She always hides behind, oh, there's so many unreasonable people on Twitter, and it's like, there are essayists, there are people who have like done the work to very calmly like explain a lot of the stuff and like contextualize why the things that you're saying are damaging, but she doesn't want to hear it, and she's made it a point to not want to hear it. So it's kind of like, all right, like if you have no desire to change, then I don't have any other option but to oppose you. Like I can't help you. Defending those who've been scorned isn't easy, especially for young people. It's scary to stand up to bullies, as any Harry Potter reader knows. Let the grown-ups in the room lead the way. If more people stood up for JK Rowling, they would not only be doing right by her, they'd also be standing up for human rights, especially women's rights, gay rights, and yes, transgender rights. They'd also be standing up for the truth. All right. So this article was dog shit, but this was also an opinion. And this person, what's their name? Who wrote this? Pamela Paul. Let's see. What else have you been writing? It's opinion columnist. Previously the editor of book reviews for 9 years, where she oversaw. What else? Can learn from Ron DeSantis. Oh boy. Hip hip hooray, cheering news for free speech on campus. A long shadow of American dirt. Okay, keep your politics out of my arugula. Whether to eat meat shouldn't be a red-blue issue. Ugh. Why has America fallen so hard for Harry? I do not know. Where have all the adults in children's books gone? Free to be you and me or not. 50 years later, we may be forgetting the lessons of children's classics. Right. Okay, well, I'm not reading any of this person's articles. All I can say is not once have I seen any actual argument besides, no, she once said trans people are cool, therefore she can't be transphobic, which again, we already talked about. This isn't really an argument. Like, we have material outcomes and we have the like results of what her rhetoric will be. I don't really care what she says. I don't care what JK Rowling says. I don't care if like she says all the right things in like little fun interviews. At the end of the day, she advocates for systems. She advocates for a format of society which harms trans people disproportionately. There's just no getting around that, unfortunately. And yeah, it is what it is. I mean, you know, this person's a dumb fuck and obviously shares the exact same opinions. She clearly just kind of buys into the same stuff and was like, oh, let me write an article about how JK Rowling's actually not like a transphobe or whatever.
There is a
and
TikTok
it's like,
that went by.
hey, I didn't say start yet, Michael. Chill out. And it's just like, all right, you can say that, but it, like, do you have an actual like? Are you going to are you going to like pay attention to any of the outcomes, or is this just, you know, it just comes down to like, no, they said they support trans people while advocating for every policy that would be detrimental to that group. So it's just stupidity. I don't know what to tell you. It's just being fucking stupid. But you know the thing that they tell, you know, like at the end of all YouTube videos where they tell you to like click on one of these like things to watch more videos. Yeah, I've been meaning to film one of those. So that's what I was doing. I was just setting it up to film one.